So I'd like to call your attention to scripture found in the gospel recorded by Luke, the 24th chapter, the 13th and 14th verses. And the reading says, "And behold, two of them went that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was from Jerusalem about 7 miles. And they talked together of all of these things which had happened." And I'd like to talk to you just for a few minutes on the subject, reflections on the resurrection. Now, this actually would have been a great sermon for last week, a week after Easter, but I did not have the time to reflect on the subject. And I thought that I'd have more time this week. And actually this week, things are more hectic than last week, and I did not have as much time as I had last week. And I want every young person to remember this statement. I wish I could. I wish the whole country of young people were here. To remember this statement has nothing to do with the sermon. It's why I should have just as well preached it last week. By not preaching it last week and not having any more time to prepare it this week than I had last week, it reminded me of something that I concluded years ago. I learned years ago. Whenever you intentionally put off something until a time is better to do it, you will almost always be forced to do it at a time that was not as good at the time when you put it off. Now, I said that for young people like Reggie. Whenever you intentionally put off anything to find a better time to do it, you are often forced to do it at a time that is worse than the time that you put it off. I remember one day having to take some books to UPS, and it was drizzling rain. And I didn't have to ship them that day. I'll ship them tomorrow. The next day it was snowing. So I just thought I'd throw that out. But anyway, reflections on the resurrection. These two people in this scripture were walking along, reflecting on the resurrection. You know, reflection is a wonderful thing. Every Christian ought to reflect. And it would be nice if you're living as a young person to live well enough so that when you get older and reflect on your life, the reflections will be pleasant reflections. I usually say that we spend much of our lives, we spend the first part of our lives making memories, and the second part living off of them. So if you don't make good memories when you reflect, you will have painful reflections. I know folks who are on drugs today and miserable, and some even under psychiatric care because their reflections are so painful. So reflections are great. And it would be great for all of us to have good reflections. And these men walking alone that day after the resurrection are reflecting. Not nearly as much as they're going to eventually reflect, but they are reflecting. And they needed to reflect. Because you see, oftentimes when you experience a thing, you really don't understand what you're experiencing, and our response to things are usually reflexive rather than reflective. So we respond to things by reflexes. And then sometimes the things that you respond to by reflexes, when you stop and reflect on them, you wonder, how in the world did I do that? Oh, if I could tell you some of the things that I did as a young person when I was a leader in the civil rights movement, and even when I was in college. And you may say, oh, some crazy things, some weird things. Maybe I need to tell you at least one, so you will not think that it was something in a total area. One day, I was in my room minding my own business, and our campus had been surrounded by the National Guard because there had been an uprising the day before, and I was a student leader. And the students called me, Reverend Jenkins, the tanks are coming. And the tanks were coming down the street. There was a street in the middle of the college, Jackson State, Lynch Street. It was not because black folks were lynched there. It was actually named after a man, Robert A. Lynch. And the street was there. And the National Guards had been camped out on the other side of the campus, and there was an uproar on the other side. They were on the west side, and there was an uproar on the east side, and they had to get down to this uproar. And they called me and said the National Guard were coming, and the kids thought they were coming on the campus. They didn't know they were just passing through the campus. And I had to go out there in the middle of the street with a t-shirt and blue jeans on, and stood in front of the tank and stood there and would not move. And they stopped. Now, that was off of reflexes. Now, when I reflected on that night, it was a different thing. So sometimes we do things and reflexes in the action of the moment. But it is only after those things that we reflect on them. These disciples are now reflecting. You see, when Jesus was being harassed, and they said to Peter, as he stood warming himself by the fire, aren't you one of them? And Peter said, no, I'm not one of them. That was reflexes. I'd bet when Peter had a time to reflect on that, he'd wish 1,000 times he could relive that moment. Sometimes when we're young, we do a lot of things. We say things to our parents and to the older people in our lives out of reflexes. And later on, when we've had time to reflect, we wish we could have those moments over. So reflection is very, very, very important. And these people are going, reflecting on what they have experienced. This awful experience that they have encountered in the last few days. And they are reflecting even on this Jesus, this experience with Christ. They're reflecting on all of that. And just walking and talking. They've been so busy, they haven't had time to think about much. They've been so busy doing and been involved in the hectic pace of soul saving and kingdom building and keeping up with this young prophet who was healing and doing all kinds of marvelous things. They didn't have time to think that much. Now that it's over, oh, they are reflecting and walking. You know, sometimes it's just good to walk and reflect, to turn off your music and just reflect. So that's what these people are doing. And Jesus joins them, but that's not what we're going to talk about, just this reflection. After they reflected on this and saw some things that they hadn't seen, some impressions are changed. You see, when you reflect on Jesus, when they reflected on what they had seen, and if they had seen what they thought they had seen, then their reflections caused them to change their impressions about some things. When they really, really experienced this. They didn't realize what they were experiencing. And now that it was over, if what they think they saw, they really saw. If what they think they heard, they really heard. If the women were telling the truth, that there was nobody in that grave, they have to rethink this Jesus. You see, they thought he was just a prophet who could speak well and had a powerful voice and who maybe could do a few miracles. That's what they thought. But if this man had actually gotten up from his grave, they had to rethink who he was. They had to rethink this Jesus. You see, a lot of time we have to rethink Jesus sometimes. When we first get into the life, we think one thing about it, but after he's been with us for a while, and we have experienced certain things with him, we rethink who Jesus is. We may think that he was a great teacher. We may think that he was an eloquent speaker. We may think that he was just someone to rally around and someone who gets a crowd together. But once we get to know him and we've been through some things with him, we may change our impression about who Jesus is. So these disciples are just reflecting. Just reflecting. And then when you reflect on Jesus and have to change your impression of who Jesus is, you reflect on this crucifixion, this event, and your idea of this event changes. You see, when a thing starts out sometimes, you don't know exactly what you're witnessing. You see, yesterday, I heard on the news today that yesterday they had the first no-hitter in the major leagues this year. The people who went to the ball game and saw the first inning, maybe 3 up and 3 down, they had no idea what they were witnessing. And then the second inning, and the third inning, and the fourth inning, and the fifth inning, and the sixth inning. They have this thing that after the sixth inning, if there has been no hits, you don't mention it, because they think that might jinx it. But it was only in the 6th and 7th and 8th inning that people started thinking maybe we may be witnessing something here that's unusual. So these people witnessed this trial. They witnessed the crucifixion. They witnessed the planting of crowns around his head made of thorns. And they witnessed the blood trickling down from his head. They witnessed the piercing in the side. They witnessed all of that and probably felt so sorry for their Savior and felt that their whole mission had been a failure. That was what they thought that day. They thought that this was a cruel thing to happen to a young man who only had hopes of deliverance of his people. They thought that he would throw off the Roman yoke and reestablish the throne of David. They thought that he would lift their people from their despair and give them a glorious idea of who they were and where they were headed. They thought that he would do all of those things. But during this crucifixion, all of that was cast aside, and they saw themselves as a defeated little group who had been embarrassed by having their hopes raised, and now they had been dashed. That's what they thought as they watched the events of that day. But now, upon reflection, it's a bit different. Upon reflection, after the women have come to the tomb and found the body gone, have gone out and said that he's risen. If that's true, upon reflection, their thoughts about this weekend was different. Upon reflection, what they saw as defeat has turned into victory. Upon reflection, what they thought as terrible has become triumphant. As they look back, what they thought was a terrible embarrassment now becomes a glorious occasion that they are happy to have been a part of. And finally, to be brief, these people, upon reflection, they have a different opinion of who they are now. Upon reflection, they have an opinion, a different opinion of who they are. They were changed. If all of this is what it is appearing to be now. They were losers yesterday, and now they're winners. They were defeated yesterday, and now they are conquerors. If all of these things are true, if the women are true in their report, if all of this news coming out of Jerusalem is accurate that he has risen, we are somebody now. We are not just a bunch of guys hanging out in the country with a guy who was not what he said he would be. We are folks who had hand-to-hand association with the Son of God. That means something. We are these people who were a part of the greatest event in the history of the world. That makes us somebody. You know, I know people in my age group who have had experienced it, and they boast about it. I know folks who were at Woodstock, and they want you to know they were at Woodstock. I know folks who were there on that summer afternoon in Washington when Martin Luther King did his I Have a Dream speech, and they want you to know that they were there. I know folks actually in the bleachers. The first World Series that the Dodgers won over the Yankees. And they want you to know they were there. But there is nothing that has been greater than this, that these people had a chance to be involved in, and now they are somebody because they were there. You know, reflection is a powerful thing. And it changes your perspective. When I had to give up my dream of becoming a professional baseball player, or my dream of becoming a movie star and become a preacher, I thought that I had been deprived of some of the great things of life. But upon reflection, as I look back, Jesus is the best thing that ever happened to me. I thought from time to time when things happened to me that they were terrible things. I thought when I lost my job from the St. Louis Public Schools that there was a terrible thing that happened to me. But upon reflection, it was God opening doors that were bigger and better and brighter. Upon reflection. You know, some of you might have had people to walk out of your life and you felt terrible about it. Oh, this is a terrible loss. But upon reflection, God might have been simply clearing a space for a better blessing. Upon reflection. Oh, it's good to reflect. So these people reflected, and if they probably said, if what we've seen is really what we think we've seen, if our reflections are bringing us into a greater understanding of what we're doing, we need to respond to our reflection. We need to go out and tell everybody about this. We need to go and tell it on the mountaintop. If what we have experienced is really real, all those folks who are dying because they don't know about this need to be told. We need to become more aggressive in our attack and approach to telling the world about Jesus in our reflection. If this is really real, we ought to want to tell more people about it. If it's really real, if it is as powerful as we think it is, we ought to not be at rest until everybody we love know about the peace of Jesus. There was a time when parents wouldn't rest until their children were in church. My mama used to take us to the Mourners Bench every year. We had Mourners Bench season. She'd take us every year. And those preachers back there would just preach and preach and preach. And we'd sit there, and all those old church folk would pray, and they would sing, and every season she'd take us to the Mourners Bench. Because she had a joy in Jesus that she wanted us to have also. And she knew that one day she was going to go home to be with Jesus, and she wanted us to come and join her there. It was really not all that joyous for us going to the Mourners Bench, I don't suppose. It seemed to have been a headache. We didn't have much else to do. We didn't have television, so it wasn't that big of a deal, I don't suppose. Might have been the most interesting place. But upon reflection, oh, it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. So as we reflect on the resurrection, as we reflect on the Jesus in our hearts, as we reflect on what he has done for us and with us, we can understand what those folks mean when they say, I wouldn't take nothing for my journey now. I bother the young people about coming to church, and they probably get mad. I make them come to church and stuff. But I hope that in 10 or 15 or 20 years, upon reflection, they'll say, I'm glad Reverend Jenkins bothered me. There's a young lady in the church in Fulton. I call them young, but they were kids. Now she's in her 50s. And she used to, didn't want to come to church. I'd make her sing. Every time, she got a beautiful voice. And every time she'd come to church, I'd insist on her singing. And she'd tell her mother would tell me, she said, I'm not going to go to church today because Reverend Jenkins going to make me sing. And she said, well, he's going to make you sing whenever you come. So you can't stay away from Elvis, so you might as well go and sing. So she'd come, and I'd have her sing. Well, a couple of years ago, she pulled me off to the side, and she said, Reverend Jenkins, thank you so much. She's a minister now. She said, it was you making me sing and using my gift that God had given me is what gave me the courage to eventually accept my call to the ministry. I didn't like it then, but upon reflection, it was a wonderful, wonderful thing.